What is good, guys? Welcome to FL Teams. My name is Dylan Spaulding. We are joined with the former collegiate quarterback himself, Mr. Vaughn Sykora, my cohort, my partner in crime, if you will, here for these USF shows. Vaughn, welcome back. We did not have a show last week. We were obviously very busy with our own personal stuff we had going on and such. So we have a show this week, and it's a winnable game finally for the South Florida Bulls as we take on them Temple Owls up in Philly. Now, Philly, we know right now, is booming right now. You know, the Eagles are playing hot. The Phillies, my Philadelphia Phillies, by the way, are playing very hot right now. You got the Sixers who aren't playing hot. You got the Philadelphia Union who are going to the championship game this weekend. So Philadelphia sports right now are booming. However, the Temple Owls are not. Maybe, though, just maybe, Temple Owls will find a way to beat our beloved USF Bulls. But based off the stats and based off some of the stuff, I wouldn't say that this will be an easy test for those Temple Owls as the Bulls head into Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, up at Lincoln Financial Field to take on the Temple Owls. But Vaughn, how are you, my friend? It's been a bit. So how is everything for you heading into today's show?
Doing good. Tough that we couldn't preview Houston against USF last week.
Yep.
Obviously, tough game for the Bulls, but
Mm-hmm.
excited. A game that we've been looking forward to for a long time, I think, especially as we've seen how this season has unfolded as a
Yeah.
game where, hey, got a winnable game this week against a Temple team that's put up quite a few stinkers this year, and a
Yep.
spot where Jeff Scott can really show what this program's all about this week.
Yeah, definitely for sure. This is, I think if you're a USF fan, you looked at the schedule heading into this year, which obviously I thought that Navy was on the schedule. If Navy was on the schedule, would have been nice to have that as well. But you look at the schedule, I think you had to have circled Temple and obviously Howard as probably the two most winnable games for this program, and probably the two games that they would have taken regardless. Obviously, we would have liked to have Bohannon, I think, heading into this weekend. I think if Bohannon was still playing quarterback, we guaranteed would most likely win this game just based off the numbers and based off some of the stuff. And we'll get into a lot of that here going into it a little bit later on in the show. But I guess let's kick things off here, talk about this Houston game on Saturday. It started out strong for USF, man. USF kind of came out of the gate, looked actually a little hot, actually. This team looked, kind of similar to some of the other games we've seen in the last couple of weeks in conference play. Team coming out of the gate pretty hot, starting out strong. And then late in the game, things just got kind of ugly as we got later into the ball game. USF ended up dropping to the Houston Cougars, 42-27. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I had listened to this on the radio because I went to the USF baseball game on Saturday. I was listening to the game on the radio. If I'm not mistaken, they had said that they have never beaten Houston in conference play, which is disappointing not to be able to get the win. It would have been a good win, especially to be able to, be the last game, against these two schools in American Athletic Conference play. Would have been nice to get a win there. Maybe put yourself in the history books there as the only team to beat them in their time in the AAC. But regardless of that, man, the Bulls, I'll give them credit. They put some, points on the board, but they got two behind early, and that really is what cost them. And unfortunately, kind of they let a little slack up, if you will, towards the end of that game. And I'll give credit; they played well early on, but just a rough way to finish out for the Fighting Jeff Scotts.
Yeah, it was tough. Just another air show is what I had in my notes. I mean,
Yeah,
Clayton Tune had a massive game, 31 completed passes for 380 yards and 4 touchdowns. So
yeah,
DBs from USF struggled once again on Saturday. And I think the offense was doing very solid. Batee was getting a lot of carries. He had those 2 early touchdowns. That
yep.
was huge for USF. But once Houston started adjusting and slowing down the run, I feel like USF's offense started to slow down, especially in
Yeah.
that second half.
Yeah, no, definitely for sure. And you look at the numbers. I mean, Nathaniel Dell, who obviously we talked about, I believe during the bye week we had mentioned that he, was going to be a guy to definitely keep an eye out for heading into this week. I even said too he would be a guy to keep an eye out for. Just that kid, man, he is having an incredible season. I believe he's at over 10 touchdowns now, if I'm not mistaken, or he's at 10 touchdowns in the stat sheet. So what an incredible year. And when you have two guys who finish with over 100 yards receiving, something's not going right there. And the secondary just looked pretty bad on Saturday, especially late in that ball game. And it's kind of one of those things where, you have two good receivers for USF. You got Xavier Weaver, you got Jimmy Horn Jr. Why can't I know this is a different offense. I know things are different with this Bulls team, but why can't we get 100 yards out of these two guys? These two guys easily could get 100 yards for us each week. If obviously I get it, we're a running team. That's the way we are, and that's the way this team is going to live and die by this season. That's just the way it is, especially now that Marsh is in for the rest of the year. I imagine we're going to be running the ball a lot more than we had with Bohannon as he kind of adjusted towards the offense. But, when you have a guy in a Weaver and Jimmy Horn Jr., those are two guys that could easily get you 100 yards out of them both in a single game.
Yeah, it's just tough. I just think when you look at the reasoning for why that is, it's just the difference of style between Houston has a vertical passing attack. They're looking to attack downfield. And then USF, it's a little bit more short. Especially with Marsh having his first game, was pretty proud of how he played. High completion percentage, took what the defense gave him. Only threw for that one touchdown and 245 yards. So nothing crazy statistically, but going into one of his first big tests, he did a good job of making sure that the team was calm around him, didn't make those big mistakes like he had in against Tulane. But that type of passing system is not going to be stretching it downfield as much as Weaver and Horn can be deep threats. USF is really looking in the intermediate to short range and completing and picking up 5 to 7 yards at a time and trying to get rolling down the field. So I really think it's just a case of a different type of system where Houston is kind of more of the throwback Raiders, bomb it down the field and see what happens. And DBs just couldn't stay with that on Saturday.
They're playing with the Brett Favre situation. Just heave it downfield and see what happens. Or Aaron Rodgers, just chuck it downfield. It's like Richard Rodgers catch back when they played with the when he was playing with the Packers against the Detroit Lions on Thursday Night Football. But no, man, it's again, and especially too with Marsh, you probably want to be more conservative. I'll give credit. Marsh actually played well. We had we had a few fumbles that ended up taking place, but we didn't, lose any, which is at least decent. Overall, they actually, in terms of turnovers, they played clean, which is obviously what Jeff Scott had said previously in one of the press conferences. I believe he actually was one of my questions he had actually answered. He was talking about how, one of the great things was the turnovers is, trying to, try to limit the amount of turnovers that they made, because that's been really one of the big things this season is the turnovers, especially a lot of the fumbles and just kind of the mental mistake that this team has made throughout the entire season. That's definitely been, I think, one of the key issues that have kind of led to some of these games' demise. And again, I mentioned the Florida game always, because I was at that game, the missed hike. And I know that was obviously, a different situation, but just these mental mistakes, man, have killed this team in so many games. But obviously this game was a little bit different. Houston pulled away late. They kind of got, things rolling late in that ball game. But again, I give credit, man, to Travis Marsh. First start this season as with the Bulls, kind of taking over for Bohannon. Apparently, Jeff Scott said he didn't even practice in the bye week, from what I read online and on Twitter and from USF people that are in the media. So kind of interesting, Marsh without a bye week of practice. Maybe for this team mentally, it might have been a good thing to not practice that week, just mentally speaking, for how much this team has had to go through this year. Maybe it was a good thing that this team didn't need to practice that bye week. Maybe it was good that they practiced a week of kind of, regroup, rejuvenate themselves. Obviously, they didn't win, but it might have been a good thing for Marsh and that team just to rejuvenate themselves and kind of get going for the last half of the season, especially with some not easy games on this back half of the season in the schedule.
Yeah, it's tough. Obviously, you want your guy to be able to practice and integrate with the team as much as possible. But like you said, with only having that 1 week of practice, Marsh did play very well. And there's a couple of times where maybe there's a couple guys downfield that maybe you would want him to take the shot. But really, out of that, such a young QB, you really want the lack of mistakes. And that's what Marsh did on Saturday. So the offense couldn't quite keep pace with Holgerson and the University of Houston, who's for a long time had a very fun offensive system, and USF just couldn't stop them defensively. But as far as Marsh goes, you can't really ask anything more out of him in his performance on Saturday. And if you can get that performance every week where you're completing that amount of your passes and and you have in the high 200s of yards.
Yep.
That's something that you would like every week, and a consistency that USF hasn't really had this year up to this point.
I know this is a different conference. I want to get your take on this here, and I'm just thinking about this right now because we're talking about this team, and obviously they put up a pretty decent amount of points the last couple of weeks. It feels like obviously the Tulane game was a bit of a different story. They kind of slacked obviously with Bohannon not being in the game, and things just had to change on a fly right there and really on a button. I want to get your take on this. If hypothetically speaking, if USF was in a different conference, let's say they were in the Conference USA, they were in the MAC. Obviously, the MAC, they'll never be in the MAC. They actually could be in the Conference USA if they really wanted to. Hypothetically speaking, if they were in another conference, maybe not so much the Sun Belt, but maybe other kind of lower tier conferences, lower than the American, do you think USF could actually maybe grab a few more wins and we could be talking about a different USF team? Because I really do think this USF team is talented, but I think for how lethal some of these American Athletic Conference teams have been this season and how good this conference has really been. I mean, it's a lot of, 2-loss, 1-loss teams that have just kind of slung it around, getting 40 plus points a week. I mean, this has really been a very, I would say, high scoring offensive conference so far this year. Would you say that if USF was in another conference, things could possibly be different for the USF Bulls, or would you think that it would most likely be the same just because of all the mistakes that the team has made to themselves?
Well, things definitely could be different. The AAC is probably the second best. I mean, the Sun Belt's been ridiculous this year.
It's been ridiculous.
But the AAC, as far as talent, might be the sixth or maybe even fifth best conference in the country. You want to talk about Louisville with Malik Cunningham. Cincinnati is considered a power at this point. What Ehlers is doing at East Carolina, and then Michael Pratt at Tulane, they're ranked 19th now. Houston's been solid for a while. So these are all very solid teams that USF is having to play. But I still don't know, based off how they've played, how they would fare in another conference. I mean, you think about the first half of the season was just plagued by tough QB play.
Yeah.
And the last couple games, the defense just hasn't really been able to hold up. So on the one hand, yes, could they probably pick up a couple more wins in an easier conference? But on the other hand, do you really want to stoop yourself down to that level just to pick up those wins? I mean, as a program, the best possible thing we could do is to continue to bring in, those state and those Bay-made people and try to grow and be the best they can in this conference. So as tough as the conference was this year, also need a higher standard of play from USF.
I completely agree with that. And I think it really, it's tough, man, because it's like, again, you wonder where it begins in terms of this. You wonder if it begins with just the actual faculty itself, like the people involved with the athletic programs and with the athletic department. You wonder if it has anything to do with, there's so much stuff that you could tie into this season, that you could say, oh, it's Jeff Scott, it's the players, it's this, it's that. There's so
Injuries.
many little, there's injuries. There's so many little things that you could wrap into this that it's almost just, it's a combustible situation right now for this team. And again, there's a lot of people to blame, I think, on this. And there's a lot of things that I think the team that could have, things could have worked out a little bit better for this year that obviously didn't end up happening. So we'll see, man. It's going to be very interesting to see what this team looks like down the stretch of the season, obviously coming off this first game here to start out the second half of the season. So they do get a game, though, this weekend against Temple. So we'll get started talking about this here, the USF Temple game this weekend, man. It's an interesting game. This is the only FBS team that Jeff Scott has actually had a win against. He has never won against any other FBS team other than Temple. So this is the only win he's had in his record currently up to this point as a head coach. Let's talk about this game here and preview this game. USF and Temple, man, this really does look like a USF game or a game for USF that they should win on paper. This Temple team is really bad offensively, and this could be a good opportunity maybe for the defense to get some momentum, maybe kind of a little bit of some good things happening for the defense here this weekend. But this, the defense is also not very good for us either. So it's kind of one of those things where this game is going to be very interesting to see kind of who controls the pace here a little bit. Is it going to be the offense for Temple, Are they going to be able to, kind of get going, or is it going to be the defense for USF who could step up and maybe kind of make their biggest splash they've had all season?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. Once again, it's always is interesting when you have these two teams that have struggled so much against other competition,
Yep.
and they both know that this is a week where they could really get a win and have a chance to show some of the positive things that they've been working on throughout the season. One of the most interesting things, their starter, EJ Warner, who is Kurt's son, he throws it all over the place, which is really interesting. I mean, it results in a lot of interceptions. He does have 6 interceptions on the year, but it's also should be a point of pride this week for USF. As we look forward towards UCF week, UCF put up 70 against Temple, which was pretty embarrassing for Temple and shows you some of the kind of talent that Temple has against a team like UCF. So if USF loses to this Temple team via transitive scoring, it's not going to be looking too hot against UCF. So point of pride this week, looking towards UCF, and also a point of pride as a team, just being ready and excited for a team of equal or closer competition.
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, this is on paper at the beginning of the year. This was the easiest in conference, non-conference, whatever, in terms of FBS level opponent. This is the easiest game he got all season. If USF doesn't win, I mean, there's got to be a lot of concern. I mean, if you can't beat Temple, I mean, this is a team on paper that you should beat. Like, there's no excuses to not beat this team. And I get Jeff Scott has, kind of praised Temple a little bit, and, they've had a few okay games, but this is a team that, again, scores on average 15.5 points a game. That is not very good offensively. And, they really have no, like, weapons at all. Like, you look at their weapons, like, only a couple, like, one touchdown for some of their top running backs, only a couple 100 yards for each of their running backs they've had this season, receiving wise. Nothing too out there, nothing too crazy. A couple touchdowns here, a couple touchdowns there. I mean, realistically speaking, nothing has clicked at all for this Temple team this year. This has kind of been a stagnant offense. I don't expect them to get anything going this week. And I do think the defense, like, we've seen what the linebacking core can do, Vaughn. We saw them against Temple. When they're fired up, they can get on a little bit of a run and a little bit of a tear defensively. We saw that against Tulane. They were rocking. I know it's a road game, but I mean, at the end of the day, how many people are going to be at that Temple game? Not very much. I'm going to say it right now. Not very much. It's going to be a lot worse than what we've seen at USF games this season. I'll just say that. So what's your take on that, at least, in what I just said there?
Well, I'm excited definitely for the defense this weekend. I mean, you have a QB who's super inexperienced, who more than likely will have a couple turnovers in the game. That gives you a chance to not only score defensively, but put yourself in a great spot offense with our own young quarterback and putting him on a short field. That could be huge. But yeah, Temple, not like we said earlier, not a lot going on offensively, whether you want to talk weapons or the stats. They just have not been able to get it going this year. Only wins have been against an FCS team and UMass, which is one of the worst FBS programs in the country. So it's been tough for this Temple group so far. Their defense has been solid enough, but if you want to talk about just offensively for Temple, it's been real rough so far this year. But EJ Warner, like I said, is going to probably make a few mistakes, and that could be a place where USF could really capitalize and try to get a good start out in this game like they've done in the couple games before. But it just seems like after the second or third quarter, the defense either runs out of gas or the other team just hasn't made enough adjustments scheme-wise where USF can't handle it, or the DBs are worn down, or whatever it is. We still need to see a four-quarter performance from this defense, and this is a spot where they could really do it.
Yeah, definitely, for sure, man. It's going to be interesting. This defense, again, they've allowed 38.1 points a game, and that's not, what you like to see on the stat sheet. And they've also allowed 488.1 yards in total defense this season per game, which is the second worst in the NCAA behind Charlotte. And Charlotte's not a very good team either. They actually fired their head coach, I believe, a week or two ago. So, yeah, USF defense going to have to step up. I think this is a great opportunity for this defense. I think this could be a very low scoring game, to be honest. I would not be surprised if it's like 20-15. I would not be surprised at all. I don't think it's going to be very high scoring. I think it's going to be very low scoring here in this ball game. Before we do make our predictions for this game, I do want to kind of highlight some of the key players for this game. I forgot to add that into our little list here of all the stuff we were going to cover, but I do want to highlight some of the key players for both squads. So we'll begin on the offensive side of things, and I guess we'll begin with USF. Who do you have as your offensive player to watch here heading into Saturday?
So my offensive player going into watch for this weekend is Travis Marsh, and I just want to see him to continue to stay calm in the pocket, continue to lead this team, have another good week of taking what the defense gives to him. I don't think he's going to need to do too much this week or score an exorbitant amount of points to have this USF team in the game. So I really wanted to be able to see this week in a game that you're definitely going to be in. How are you going to handle from drive to drive the little bit of ups and downs and adversity? Hopefully not as much adversity we've seen in the last couple of weeks, but keeping this team in it, being a leader, and showing really what he could do with this offense when he really has the keys and a shot to win the game.
I like it. I like the pick there. Obviously, Travis will be interesting to see because if you think about it, this is a great opportunity for Travis to really ball. I mean, he could ball this weekend if he really wanted to, and I think he could. I think he's just got the capability to do it. It's just a matter of how the offense responds early. We saw it last week. If they can respond the way they did last week against Temple, I really do think USF is going to easily walk over Temple, most likely. If they can respond and play the way they did early against Houston, I really do think that they could really have a good game this Saturday and really play a good 4 quarters of action against this Temple team. For me, I'm going to go, it's either between Brian Battie and Michael Dukes here. I'm going to go Battie. I think Battie, if you will, is the more sexier pick, if you will, in terms of the running back position. I love Michael Dukes. I love what he's done this season. He's been a great secondary back out of the backfield, great short game, type of player. But I like what Battie has brought to the table this year, and he's just continued to impress me all season. Arguably, the highlight of the season has been Brian Battie and the way he stepped up. I mean, everybody was talking about Jaron Mangum heading into the season, being possibly the workhorse, if you will, for this offense. Battie has stepped up. Really haven't seen too much of Mangum this season in terms of the running attack, and it's been great to see Battie really kind of, getting things on track and really becoming a great running back out of the backfield for this Bulls team.
Yeah, he's been awesome to see so far, and he's another guy I would like to see. Let's continue, even if the team starts to slow on him and give him put more defenders in the box when Battie is there. Continue to give him carries throughout the second half because it feels like he's had a bunch of big first halves, but it hasn't really been the same in the second half. So I hope that team will continue to give him touches late into the game.
I honestly could see Battie finish with 150 yards rushing. I really do believe that. I especially if it gets ugly early, say if it's like 21-0, USF just puts them on, to Temple. Would not be surprised if Battie just runs all over Temple late in the game. Temple's just dejected at that point. I really would not be surprised if that ends up being the case. So we'll see. It'll be nice to see him get 150 yards. It'll be a good day. Hopefully maybe gets a touchdown or two as well as he did last week. We'll go into the Temple player of the game or player to watch in terms of offense. Again, really not a ton of options here. I feel like we might have the same person just because we were talking about him a little bit and, kind of the unpredictableness of him. Vaughn, I'll begin with you first. Who do you have as your player to watch for Temple offensively?
Well, I had EJ Warner, who we talked about is Kurt's son, who has struggled pretty mightily this year so far. 53% completion percentage and a bunch of picks to go with a bunch of fumbles. Isn't the biggest guy, but he'll throw it all over the yard and he can make some plays happen. Is pretty electric guy, just still trying to find his way in his young college career.
Yeah, I'm going to go EJ Warner as well. I think, I think as you mentioned, what he's can do on Saturday will be interesting to see, especially against the USF defense that really has struggled. If he can play, come out and kind of, get started early. Again, I'll be honest, I haven't watched much Temple football this year just because of how bad the team has been this season. Outside of that one game that I did end up going to and such, and I'll be honest, they did run a lot of dual quarterback plays in terms of, switching out Warner for, I believe, one of their other quarterbacks that they have as well. If I can get the name correctly here, I want to make sure I say DeJuan Mathis. He's a big kid. They've used him a lot out of the backfield as almost a running back quarterback, similar to like Clint Flowers, except he's a little bit bigger of a size. In terms
Yeah,
of
he's
his
played some receiver for them as well.
yeah, he's also played some receiver as well. Yeah. So I would definitely like to see what EJ Warner will do. And you never know, maybe Temple will do some of these type of trick plays and maybe it does catch USF off guard because I don't know, it feels like sometimes the secondary is just walking, like to be honest with me. Like we've seen that a lot this year where it just feels like the actual like assignments that the USF players defensively have been given, they're not actually, fully making a good, they're not doing a good job with their assignments. They're moving a lot around and it just seems like sometimes they're a little dysfunctional defensively.
Yeah, I think it seems. I mean, the one rule you have as a safety or a deep DB in coverage is don't let anybody behind you. And it feels
Yeah.
like over and over again, whether that be because of play action or
Yeah.
the way that the play was schemed up, it just feels like the receivers are running
So easy.
behind the DBs almost every
So
single
easy.
game.
Yeah, it's been definitely a rough year for the secondaries, which is unfortunate because I talked so much about this secondary heading into the year about, oh, this secondary is going to be great. It's going to be amazing to watch. And they have very much proved me wrong on that aspect. So we'll go defensively now for our defensive players to watch. I guess let's begin with Temple because there is one player I looked at here. And actually, their defense is not horrible. Like, it's actually a decent defense in terms of like total defense allowed. They're like a mid-pack defense, actually, surprisingly. But there's one player that I will say has to be the defensive player to watch out for Temple. I don't know if you have the same player as me, Vaughn, but who do you have as your defensive player of the week to watch out for Temple?
I had Jordan Layton for Temple, who's their 6'2", 220-pound outside linebacker, has 2 picks and 2 forced fumbles on the year, as well as 13 tackles for loss. So he's just been a monster. He's been one of their few bright spots this year. They have had a couple nice defensive performances. They only gave up 16 to Rutgers. They shut out UMass, who struggles, but is still an FBS team. So although this team did give up 70 points to UCF, they had a couple of strong defensive outings, and Jordan Layton was a big part of that.
Yeah, I'm gonna go I'm actually gonna go a dual. I'm gonna go dual. I'm gonna go two if you will. I'm gonna go Leighton Jordan, the linebacker for Temple, and I'm gonna go Darian Varner. You mentioned obviously both of them have combined to get 13 sacks defensively. That's impressive. So I'm gonna go both of them together just because of how impressive they've been sack wise. But you mentioned Leighton Jordan, man, he's had a fantastic year. 2 picks. Both of them, by the way, were return touchdowns because he's got 2 touchdowns as well. So 2 picks for 2 touchdowns. That's very impressive. And also 2 forced fumbles. And one of them, by the way, was a forced fumble touchdown. So it's been a very good season for Leighton Jordan, man. He's had a really nice year and definitely going to be a guy to watch out for defensively for this Temple squad heading into this weekend because, again, this Temple team actually is one of the bright spots. It's the defense. This Temple defense is really the bright spot, which feels like such a Philly thing. Like, I don't know if it's you, but or if it's just me, but I mean, I don't know. It just feels like a
You
Philly
got some
thing to me.
tough-nosed people out there.
Yeah, exactly. So that is going to be my defensive players, if you will, for this Saturday to watch. Now we'll go to USF. Who do you have as your defensive player to watch out for Saturday?
So as you were saying earlier about the linebackers, this could be a big week for them. So I had DJ Gordon, the fourth, who has been playing very solid as of late. The last 3 games, he has 25 total tackles, which has been huge for the defense. So Boyles has been one of the big bright spots, and Gordon has been solid the last couple of weeks as well in trying to move this USF defense in the right direction. As the 4 out of the 5 last games, the opponent has scored over 40 points. So chance this week to start to right that ship and get it moving in the right direction. And I think DJ Gordon will be a big part of that.
I am going to go with a man who has had a very good season defensively. And I am going to go with Jason Vaughn. The 5 sacks on the year for him this season. He's had a very nice season so far this year. He had 3 sacks alone in that game against Tulane. He's had a very nice season. He actually, up until last week, he actually had a sack once each week. He had a sack against ECU, a sack against Cincy, and a sack against Tulane. Obviously he had 3 total in the Tulane game, but I'm gonna go with my man, Mr. Jason Vaughn, the defensive end junior out of Miami, Florida. He's had a great year. He's been, at least getting a sack. He's been getting to the quarterback. And I think, with this offense, the way it's been this season for Temple, I think he could definitely make a splash here heading into Saturday. So that's going to be my pick this weekend to watch, is going to be Jason Vaughn with 5 sacks on the year, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, a couple games. There's really been some stretches where the front seven's been very solid for this
Yeah.
group. So hopefully that'll continue.
So, Vaughn, let's make our final predictions, man. Temple, USF. Again, this is the most winnable game that USF has. Can we finally say, and can we come back next week when they play, I believe it's SMU, which is next weekend. I will be at the SMU game covering it next Saturday here in Tampa, noon kick, and it's salute to service, by the way. Got to salute out to all our service men and women out there. For what they do for our country. But what do we got here, man? Temple and USF. What's your prediction? What are we going to see on the scoreboard heading into Saturday afternoon?
So, like you said, I think it's going to be a lower scoring game. I think USF's finally going to be able to pull one out in Philly. That would be awesome, and I think that the offense will hopefully pop off throughout the 4 quarters, and we can have more of a complete game. And Marsh can continue on. Taking what the defense giving him, as I was saying, and distributing it to the playmakers and the guys who can make plays happen, like Weaver or Jimmy Horn Jr. And I think USF, like I said, pulls it out. Hopefully EJ Warner has a couple turnovers and USF can capitalize on that. And I would go USF 28, Temple 17 this Saturday.
I like it. I'm going to go USF. I'm going to go USF 26. And I'm gonna have Temple. I'm gonna have him. Oh, give me 13. I think Temple gets a touchdown. Maybe they try to go for 2 and miss something. I don't know. I don't think there will be a ton of points scored either. I think it's gonna be a very low scoring game, kind of a defensive battle in the trenches, maybe, even, if you will. I do think this is gonna be a very intriguing matchup for the Bulls fans. If there's any matchup that Bulls fans should be excited about, it really should be this one. And there's really not much excitement about this game just because of really how bad these teams have been this year. But USF really again, they've have talent on this team to win ball games. It's just we've come up short every single time. It feels like very similar to last season. And it feels like, too, man, a lot of people have been saying Jeff Scott might be safe this year. I know you mentioned, obviously, Jeff Scott, and I do believe that he should get another chance really for next season, because next year will be the really big test to see where this team is at against, especially competition that will be kind of a lesser in terms of the play. Obviously a lot of Conference USA teams moving over, and it's all been officiated, like official, in terms of the writing in the paper. So we will have a couple new teams heading into next season. And by the way, I got to mention before we let everybody go, Gary Bohannon will be back for 2023. We'll get your thought on this, Vaughn. What do you think about Bohannon returning for a second season as a USF Bull? This is pretty exciting, man, especially, again, with a lot lesser competition heading into next year, going to be a little bit of an easier conference. This could be a recipe for some excitement heading into next season. USF might have a shot next year, especially if this team can get things back on track the way it was, during the Quentin Flower era, during those times, and really when the team was just dominant and one of the top teams in terms of group of 5.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely huge, especially if the plan is to keep Scott. If you're not keeping Scott, I'm not a huge fan of having the super senior play when there's younger guys available to get very important reps. But if Scott's going to be coming back and it's going to be a kind of tryout year for Scott, and if it goes well, then maybe we'll sign you to another couple years, and if it doesn't, you're out of here. And Bohannon could be a big part of that, especially he's a guy who already knows the offense and already knows what Scott wants to do going into the next year. The only question is, are we going to get the Bohannon that we saw in the first half against Tulane, or are we going to get the Bohannon that we saw in the first 4 or 5 weeks this year where he had some serious struggles throwing the ball? So hopefully with that whole year off and to rehab, and hopefully he's healthy and back at 100%, because he could be a guy who we saw at Baylor and we saw in spurts this year can be really special, and somebody that if Scott has all this time to work with, it'll be almost 3 years by the time we'll kick off next year. That could be really big for this offense.
I cannot wait, man, when spring football comes around. I'm actually thinking about asking Scott, like, it has to be, like, I wonder what his take is. Like, if he thinks it's going to be a make or break year for him. Like, I know it's a weird question, but you got to wonder what Jeff Scott's thinking right now, because he knows he's got to be in some hot water. I mean, he can't be completely safe from his job. He doesn't know, obviously, whether or not he comes back. I think he comes back. Again, my big thing is I hope that Jeff Scott can turn things around with this program. And I think if we give him another year next year to see what he can do with a brand new conference, I mean, this conference is completely changing next year, like absolutely completely changing. I know there's going to be new teams, or there's going to be same teams from, this AAC original, if you will. I kind of call this the 2.0 of the AAC, if you will, the Conference USA Plus, maybe even. But I mean, you got to wonder, man, like what Jeff Scott is thinking about, like heading into next year. Like, it's got to be a make or break season for him. Like, if he doesn't prove next year that he can coach this team to a winning season, he's got to be gone. There's no way you can keep him around next season if he doesn't perform.
Yeah, same thing. I think a lot of people have been calling for him to be fired at the end of this year if they don't win 2 out of 4 games. We'll see. Once again, with the financials and all that, I really think that there's no way he gets fired at the end of this year in the way that.
And you mentioned too, there's really, and if there's not a good candidate out there, what do you got better?
Yeah, and why not give him the 1 more year? And I think the faculty and the president even is committed to Jeff Scott throughout at least next year, see what he can do. Like we've said a bunch of times, this year was just the year from hell with all of the injuries. So hopefully next year, you can have one final shot, and if it doesn't go well next year, then just have a clean break. And
the walking under the ladder situation and all this.
But
stuff
yeah, if there's not an FBS team beat this year, it's going to be really tough to be having a lot of hope going into next year. So need to see a serious game here from USF, and to at least keep it close against Temple if there is going to be any hope about this program next week against SMU.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I do think this team should win this game. If we don't, I want to have a good I need to have a good press conference heading into Saturday, Vaughn. Like, I need to have something positive to ask Jeff Scott about this Saturday when I'm in his press conference, because I will be there in the press conference. Wasn't able to get there last week, and obviously I was kind of happy I wasn't there, just the way the team played. Honestly, that's why I didn't even write a recap, just because of the way it ended up finishing out. I was very disappointed about that game. So we'll see. Hopefully we do get a positive Jeff Scott heading into Saturday, or I guess after Saturday's game. But we're almost done, Vaughn. Like, it's crazy to think, man. Only 3 weeks left of the season after this week. We got SMU at home next week, Tulsa on a Friday night, which I'm very excited for. Looking forward to that game. And then you get UCF on Saturday weekend after Thanksgiving. That's gonna be a massive game right there. I mean, again, that's our bowl game this season, is the UCF game. So very much looking forward to that. But for everybody here at FL Teams, for myself, Dylan Spaulding, for Vaughn Sykora, we are signing off for tonight. We will have more stuff coming out. Vaughn will obviously be doing the UCF game together. I know that. So we'll be doing coverage for that game coming up. I'll be at the Bethune-Cookman Florida A&M Florida Classic game. Dude, I cannot freaking wait. That's going to be so fun. I'm so excited. So I'm looking forward to that. But for myself, again, Dylan Spaulding, for the former QB, Vaughn Sykora, peace out, guys. We'll see you in the next episode.